The gaming industry is changing at a rapid pace. It's quickly becoming clear that the more companies that are doubling down politically are clearly feeling the strain of their stances in the sand as the profits, goodwill, and future foundations of players' loyalty is sweeping past them for more logical and better endeavors. This video will be a little all over the place. Monster Hunter, Assassin's Creed, Avowed, and much more, but it'll all make sense by the end, I assure you. To begin, let's go with this one from IGN. Monster Hunter Wilds' popularity is thanks to story emphasis, immersion, and crossplay, series producer says. Ryozo Tsuchimoto, who will soon become Chief Creative Officer of Capcom's entire video game division, due to his success with the series, has claimed a few reasons why Wilds is so successful. Of course, other Monster Hunter games have also had story in them. This is nothing new. However, in the case of Wilds, it's never been this cinematic and by the rails, so to speak, compared to previous games. As someone who's played a few, but not all of the games in the series, I found my time with Wilds to be the most enjoyable from the first 20 hours or so in my experience. I really dug how the game fleshed out its world, brought you in with likable characters for the most part, and gave each person a distinct personality. My favorite parts of Wilds' story, personally, and I think it's been long enough since release so that I can now bring this up without worry, is the inclusion of the Guardian storyline. I found the idea of adding an entire faction of monsters to hunt that are pretty much cloned to be a genius idea to a series like this. Yeah, I know, it's basically Jurassic Park becoming canon in Monster Hunter's world, but it's still really cool. Because now Capcom can just bring back monsters to Wilds and future games that geographically have zero business being in that particular region of the world, without really having to explain much. How did this monster get here? Well, maybe someone had a vial of its blood from hunting it years ago. And the Wyverians, the race that made the Guardians, bought that vial of blood from some merchant that was passing through like many years ago. And then they just took that blood and cloned whichever monster it was that was there, and like I said, a genius concept, because now nothing is truly ever extinct, so to speak, in Monster Hunter really going forward. And I don't know about you, but the idea of hybrid monsters that are maybe spliced between, say, I don't know, a Rathalos and a Gormagala, that sounds pretty freaking metal to me, guys. Or why not mix Arkveld with a Kangala, and then you got a big hairy dragon that can hold you down with bone chains, that can also shoot lethal farts out of every part of its body to kill you. Now that's a lot of damage, but this is the point. What Capcom has done here has blown the doors off what to expect for Monster Hunter going forward. They're going somewhat into Resident Evil territory because there's no way these Guardians don't end up mutating or breeding with other weird monsters and making messed up hybrids. And don't act like there's no way these Guardians will be contained to where Wilds takes place only. If Jurassic Park has taught us anything, it's that life always finds a way, and they sure as hell will do that here too. But like I said, the success of Wilds has made it the breakout hit so far of the year by a landslide. According to Matt Piscatella, an industry analyst, Wilds has had the biggest launch in 2025 so far, surpassing everything and being the biggest game launched since Black Ops 6 last year. And PC, by the way, was the lead platform, which is a shame considering how the game is still not running the best for PC players even now. Regardless of all of this, Wilds has made Capcom a lot of money. The kind of success places like Capcom has been having is definitely what other companies can only dream of, and then the Gamer reported as well on Wilds' success. Although they did reference a Reddit thread where users showed disdain for Monster Hunter's new direction, which says, "The relentless on-rails hand-holding in story mode is absolutely ridiculous. I just want to explore on side paths just the slightest bit. Look at vistas, hunt small monsters, gather items, etc. But nope, gotta get tethered back to the sluggish moving group like a child and get scolded for it." Did the developers seriously think people wanted this? They are treating the player base like incompetent children. Let me play the game, fools. Look, I do agree that the moments where Wilds slows the game to a crawl to make you leisurely walk with your group is egregious. I think that any game that does this is genuinely annoying, to be honest. They're not the only one to do that, I know. Plenty have as well. I mean, the more recent Final Fantasies have done it, as well as the new God of War games, which are especially egregious for just being full of unskippable sections in that game, which is a big reason why I never replayed either new God of War games after I finished them. Although personally, the cutscenes in between the fights were awesome, and thankfully the campaign isn't too long anyways. And once you beat the main slice of it, sure there's more after it story-wise, but you're then off the leash so to speak, and then allowed to do pretty much anything you want. Could Capcom have found a nicer balance in between the hand-holding and the more freedom of exploration? Absolutely. But for what it is, I won't lie, the story made me feel actually connected to the world of Monster Hunter in a way that previous games have not. And like I said in previous videos, the domination of specifically China and other Asian countries when it comes to video games is going to keep spreading like wildfire in the future, and the continuing decline of Western content is not far off either. As Eurogamer reports, about 50% of all Steam users in February 2025 were from China alone. And coincidentally, Steam also recently, around that time, hit its highest concurrent player count yet, sitting at around 40 million players online at one given time for the platform. According to Steam, there was a surge of demand in languages being supported in games being that of Chinese origin. Simplified Chinese to be exact. The increase, by the way, was a staggering 20.88%, which is a lot. Apparently, every time around this year, which also lands with Chinese New Year, there's a surge of players on different platforms. However, in Steam's case last year during the same period, they saw an increase of 7.26% in Chinese players. So this year, they've almost tripled that engagement, which is something to note. Some reasons given as to why there's this massive presence on Steam is for a few reasons. One is that games like Marvel Rivals or Mecha Break are really popular, both made by Chinese studios by the way. Although the big equalizer that opened the floodgates, so to speak, goes all the way back to Black Myth Wukong actually. Wukong, by the way, sold almost 9 million copies in 3 days. By the end of its first month or two, the game had surpassed well over 20 million units. I think as of now, Wukong has actually even outsold Elden Ring, if you can believe it. And since then, as seen here from GameIndustry.biz back in December 2024, China has become an overnight video game making nation that is doubling and tripling down on their efforts going forward when it comes to video game development. Sure, yeah, Monster Hunter Wilds is Japanese, not Chinese, but regardless, this Asian domination is only going to get worse for the West and not less in the future. After all, according to GameIndustry.biz here, China currently has about, get this, 722.5 million gamers in China alone in 2024. That number is expected to increase to about 747.9 million by 2028. Like, to put this in perspective for you, that means that China's market alone for video game hungry buyers is about twice and then some the entirety of all of the United States of America right now, if you can believe it. So I just want you to fathom how many people in China has that plays video games and, supports and buys them. Now imagine catering to this ever-growing crowd of people while simultaneously being able to shoot your game across the globe to places like America, Canada, Australia, and more as well. The potential for China's mass expansion into video games quite literally has no bounds or sense of stopping anytime soon. And like I said, Wukong was the one that kind of broke the dam and released the deluge, so to speak, and it's like not even Asian devs need to just rely on their games alone. Sure, Monster Hunter is killing it right now, but these Asian countries are even circling like sharks smelling blood when it comes to Western devs as well. Just look at Assassin's Creed Shadows. As 9meters.com reported here back in January even, Shadows is make or break for Ubisoft as a company. When you place their dwindling stock up against this story, it paints an even bleaker picture, sadly, as well. For the once great, sort of great, I guess, Western game publisher, according to 9meters report here, Shadow's entire development cost before the delays, it sits somewhere between $250 to $350 million. My God, that's a lot of money. But remember, you got to add another $20 million that was spent from November 2024 to right about now before Shadows launches to fix it even more. So the actual number for Shadow's development cost is likely somewhere in the $400 million ballpark. That's a lot of money, I know. So to make this simplified, not including taxes or different regions of currency, let's just use USD here for simplification. But Shadows would need to sell about 7 million copies out of the gate or do about as well as Monster Hunter Wilds did pretty much at release to essentially break Ubisoft somewhat even on the game prior to them making any profit from it. Now, could Shadows do this? Maybe. I mean, let's be real, the franchise is well known and has plenty of people who are big fans of the series. I do personally believe that Shadows will easily at least break 1, maybe 2 million in sales within its debut if I had to guess right out of the gate. However, will it break 8 million to get even or more than that? I mean, time will tell. Those reviews and impressions that are coming out, they are going to matter a lot in this case. But I think the ongoing conversation of how Ubisoft clearly doesn't care about the culture of Japan mixed with the fact that they have so many skeletons that are jumping out of their closets all the time from their own executives getting accused of all sorts of sexual, racist, and overall awful allegations. To say that there's a lot riding on Shadows, that would be doing it no justice, dear viewers. The game needs to be a smash-out Wilds-esque success, or Ubisoft is pretty much cooked, dear viewer. Well, like I said, to expect Shadows to become the next Monster Hunter Wilds is, well, stretching it a little. Because placing the two games up against one another, Wilds has far less controversy tied to it prior to its release. Sure, yes, the game doesn't run well on PC out of the gate, or still doesn't, that's 100% true. And I know some have tried to throw the woke card at Wilds and say it has diverse women or girl bosses. But that was more so a nothing burger in my opinion, which is why you didn't see me claiming those things myself ever on this channel or even on Twitter. But in Shadow's case, there's so much baggage, I genuinely fail to imagine another game in recent memory that has more baggage attached to it prior to release than this one does. Everything about Shadows is just mired in controversy and exposures of how Ubisoft doesn't know how to translate Japanese culture to a video game well. But like I said, Shadows' one saving grace is the fact that it is an Assassin's Creed game. And I think the game could be terrible and people would probably still buy it because of the name alone. But I am not necessarily rooting for Shadows to fail because I am a fan of this series. Hell, I've platinumed like, 4 or 5 of the games in this series already? I've played all these games. I play them mostly as junk food gaming, if you will. That's what they are to me. And no, I couldn't tell you what a single side quest was in, say, Odyssey or Valhalla despite 100%ing them, but I do remember just, having fun being in those settings. Although according to Yahoo Finance, as they state here, Ubisoft has been told to sell themselves as Tencent talks increase. I reported on Tencent wanting to buy Ubisoft a long time ago, as people who work at Ubisoft told me that. People said I was lying only for me to be proven right, again. Anyway, the report states that Ubisoft's net bookings dropped around 35% already this year alone, and its 2025 forecast is expected to drop another $0.50, bringing its value for its shares down from €1.20 to €1 only. And Shadows is being seen as the make or break moment. We're about to witness history, fellas. We're about to find out if Assassin's Creed is going to stay a Western-controlled franchise or become a Chinese one in just a few days or I guess a week or two from this video's release. Like I was saying, comparing Wilds to Shadows is a good comparison because it shows both sides of the coin. You can either have your game released to fanfare and then make you well over $400 million in 3 days like Wilds did, or end up like Ubisoft is right now, where they are genuinely about to drown themselves if Shadows doesn't perform well. And while sure, in its post-release hype, Wilds is now getting the sorts of articles like this one from PC Gamer, where they loathe how the game was holding their hands in low rank, I think Wilds still shows that Capcom knows what they're doing with this franchise in particular. And thankfully, they didn't double or triple down on the usual Californian nonsense that plagues video games these days. And I do think placing Wilds and even games like Wukong and others that have made big splashes against their Western contemporaries is for good reasons a fine example. For one, the West needs to prioritize real gameplay again and stop pushing agendas so much. Sure, you'll have the odd somewhat success out there like Avowed apparently was, where Screen Rant alleges that Avowed has hit 5.9 million players since launch. But this number, when further studied, is shown to come from an analyst group that confirms in their own words here, as you can read, that this number was found via estimates that the analysts made based on info that they could find online. Meaning the actual number of players who played Avowed is not what they're really saying, but just what they're pushing as fact without actual concrete evidence. And you know things haven't gone well when you kind of need to dance around the facts like this to come to a conclusion. Whereas with Monster Hunter, we just know that it sold 8 million in 3 days because Capcom said that and showed it. It's perplexing how Western gaming content just can't seem to reach the same numbers as the East anymore. Also remember that 5.9 supposed million players of Avowed, most of them didn't even buy the game at full price either. They just streamed it, so the actual profit from Avowed is far, far lower than say the amount Monster Hunter made from the 5.9 million sales of those 8 million in 3 days in comparison. Have we reached the point where the satisfaction and expectations of Western gaming media is so poor that the only way that these companies and studios can compete with their overseas competition is to now rely on subscription numbers or streams instead of actual paid copies anymore. I guarantee you that when Shadows launches, it will become one of the most played games that Ubisoft has made. But there will be a caveat that by most played, they'll mean via Ubisoft Play, which if you don't know, that's their Game Pass-like service for Ubisoft's games specifically, which again, you don't pay full price in order to play those games that way. Case in point, the continued destruction of Western franchises, once thought unbeatable, is becoming a reality. I don't know if Shadows will be able to somehow surpass Wilds in terms of players. I would be shocked if it even hits 100,000 in its first weekend of concurrent players on Steam, to be real with you. But the fact, whenever I compare what the West is doing versus the East, it always comes to the same sad realization, which is that this once very powerful, all-knowing side of gaming has been reduced to a shadow, no pun intended, of itself for the most part. Outside of some anomalies, customer satisfaction and trust in Western games has never been lower. Outside of maybe Call of Duty and Fortnite for obvious reasons, but with the mass expansion into overseas markets and the continued success of brands like Monster Hunter and more, I ask this question: in 5 years' time, who do you think will be the king, so to speak, of gaming? Will it be the East or the West? I think I can confidently say that the East is going to overtake the West before long, and I mean, just go look at Tencent for a great example of this. The mega Chinese giant owns an insane amount of assets across the world and many companies that you likely play video games from. Just to name a few, Tencent owns 30% of Larian Studios, that's the Baldur's Gate 3 people. 40% of Epic Games, which makes Fortnite. 80% of Grinding Gear games, they make Path of Exile. And even, unfortunately, 16% of From Software, the Dark Souls and Elden Ring people. But the unfortunate reality for the Western side of the equation is that China just simply has the manpower to essentially outlast and outperform the West at pretty much every given metric due to sheer volume alone. Like I said, their player base within their own country is quite literally self-sustaining, it just is. They could theoretically just cater to that 700 and then some million players that will keep growing, by the way, and keep their pockets lined easily. But Tencent, and even NetEase, that's the Marvel Rivals people by the way, have their assets stretched across so many that ultimately, even if you do buy some Western games, your money is, to some capacity, making its way overseas to China anyways. Of course, some may say, couldn't people just stop supporting any studio or publisher that is aligned with China? I mean, sure, but it's probably impossible and likely that will never happen, because there's no way that you'll convince a Fortnite enjoyer to stop playing that game, or Rivals, or PUBG, Path of Exile, hell, even stuff like Wukong even. All of these games are more owned by the monolith that is going to inevitably crush the West. Even Japan, although their games do well to varying degrees, oftentimes they too need to submit to China for funding to make their games as well. As of now anyway, Tencent does not own Capcom. However, they are working with Capcom to make a mobile game version of Monster Hunter for international markets. And since a large section of China's revenue is from free-to-play microtransaction-heavy games already, I really wouldn't be surprised if this hypothetical future Monster Hunter mobile game ends up asking you to pay just $1 or $2, you know, here or there, so you can go hunt one more time, or skin that monster just a bit more so you can go get your new weapon or armor. It is a double-edged sword, because while if and when Asian markets dominate everything, things like your identity politics will disappear in games. Mostly because their countries do not really allow for these sorts of expressions or ideologies to run amok in their countries, due to seeing how damaging they are clearly in the West right now. But at the same time, what will inevitably replace this ideology will just be a new one, an ideology of pure iron fists that are crushing you down with insanely heavy monetization in pretty much every game imaginable going forward. And really, no matter what you do, it's going to be impossible to eventually escape these things in really any of your video games. I often catch myself wondering, what do I want in the future? Do I want a games industry ran on trans and gay values that obviously will just desecrate every franchise I love in the long run? Or do I want those things removed, but then have to deal with heavy monetization in my video games and more? Neither option is 100% bulletproof or genuinely good, but I'm of the mind personally that it's becoming increasingly clear that there may not be a middle ground forming in time that can hold either side back, so to speak. Unless magically the entire Western games industry transforms overnight and starts making testosterone level Gears of War games suddenly at alarming rates, The likely reality is that the West pushes for things that aren't working, and it's going to definitely kill them. And the more that I look, the more that I witness that the games that are doing the best are the Asian ones, not just China, mind you, but Asian in general, and we're reaching a point where things have to go one way or the other eventually. Because it can't keep doing this back and forth forever non-stop. I'll have a more westernized-centric video coming after this one is published, but to just keep it simple, it seems like the West has just refused to learn from their own problems. And even the East is still doing stupid stuff. Take this from Bounding into Comics. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth's director says Japanese devs now create with a global audience mind from the very start, confirms games subjected to thorough ethical reviews tailored to different regions. Naoki Hamaguchi stated during this interview that even when they, as in Square Enix, a Japanese company, makes video games now, it's always being made with the West in mind from the beginning. And Square Enix hasn't been doing the best either. Capcom and Sega with their other studios like Atlus or Ryu Studio, they have been kind of cleaning them up lately in terms of sales, and it shows as well within critical reception of their games versus Square's. But what Square Enix is currently doing, in my opinion, is what Capcom and others should avoid entirely. Even though Capcom is, to some degree, being riddled with ESG as well, that is true and cannot be denied. The point is that pandering to the West, so to speak, isn't a good thing either. Monster Hunter doesn't sell because it's a Western series, which it isn't. It's Eastern, obviously. Final Fantasy is and should be the same way. It too doesn't sell because of those Western sensibilities, so to speak. It sells when it actually, caters to those Eastern influences. And like the overall industry battle at the heart of all of this that's going on, it's up to even Japanese companies like Square Enix and more to ensure they too don't get lost in the miasma of China's inevitable dominance of everything in gaming that is coming. Because make no mistake, it won't just be the West that has to submit, but even the other Asian markets that sit outside of China's control, currently anyway. And none of this is going to end without some bloodshed happening, but in terms of Western companies, I leave you with this question to ponder. And do you even care if Ubisoft or others get bought by China? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.